And one guy that seems to have buried you a little bit over the years is John Cena. No question, one of the most successful wrestlers of all time. Now he's genuinely made the switch to acting. He's buried a lot of people though, not just you. And we've heard that he's been a good politician in the back too, as far as eliminating competition from time to time. But he has gone after you pretty personally hard. Um, what do you know? What do you know about what this grudge is
Oh,
all
dude,
about, and how is your relationship with him now?
is this the infamous Hannibal shoot part of the interview? I think we're there. Uh, that's what it feels like. Yeah, it's funny. Because John is absolutely one of the most famous guys ever in the history of pro wrestling, and well deserved, I would say. I get asked about him all the time. I almost never address it. I've really never addressed it thoroughly. But fuck it, let's do it thoroughly here once and for all, and then hopefully I can dispense with it forever. That said, John Cena rents very, very little space in my brain these days, but still probably more than I rent in his. I can't imagine he would have thought of me in years. He'd have no reason to, achieving what he's achieved. I understand. I wouldn't expect him to think about me. Um, Before I answer that question about John, let me give an example. Let me give an opposite example. I want to come back to John and maybe others that fit in that unappreciative category, unfortunately. And I have heard about John burying me over and over again. So at one point, obviously, I did rent some space in his brain, and I can't figure out. Maybe you can figure it out today. That would be a cool takeaway. All shop at like he didn't call in advance. He got in his car, packed up whatever meager belongings he had, drove all the way from Texas, and showed up at UPW. Now, as I mentioned before, this is back when Jim Ross said, "Wow, your locker room is more physically impressive than ours." Dude, the message was loud and clear back in those days. You remember it. Size mattered back then, way more than it does now. Paul comes in. I mean, good-looking guy. He's in good shape. But, dude, another guy like LA Knight, shame on me all these years later, I did not look at twice. I was never unkind to Paul London. I know he would tell you that. I was never, I don't want to say dismissive. I probably was a little dismissive. Didn't really give him a shot. You look back at the old UPW records, KG Sakota defeats Paul London. Samoa Joe defeats Paul London. Skula, the Samoan Savage, defeats Paul London, on and on. Nothing vindictive on my part or the Booker's parts. Dude, I saw nothing in Paul London. And again, I just feel sacrilegious to me now because he turned out to be so good. Cruiserweight champion, tag team champion. But let's forget his accomplishments for a moment. Paul London today is one of my favorite human beings in the world because I did nothing for this guy. I mean, nothing. And this guy has been nothing but nice and giving and gracious to me over the years. And I'm like, if there's someone that I deserve to get buried by, it would have been him. And there's a lot of other guys I can paint in with that same brush who I did very little for, who are great guys. And dude, if an opportunity comes up now, Paul London would be one of the first guys that I would call. He's a good human. He deserves everything good that comes his way. Guys like John, and you brought up John, so we'll go with that example. To me, that's like that's the flip side. So, we talked about how closed door how closed door the wrestling business was. So, and I think you also said people probably that came through my system at that time that I got in probably would not have gotten in otherwise. John might be the exception to that, man, for a couple of reasons. One, he's an incredibly driven guy. The guy's focused. What was that MTV show called where people, I think it was called Driven. He should have been on that show. That was him. He personified that. And he looked great. I mean, he wasn't 6'5", but I think 6 foot. When he walked through my doors that first time, I think the Bell brothers brought him to introduce him, if memory serves. It didn't take a genius to look at him and go, that guy's got it. Anybody would have seen that. So John Cena did the work to create the physical presence that was John Cena. John Cena works his ass off. He's the guy that will do 400 Make a Wish visits because he's got a work ethic. Um, I think John wanted to make it in pro wrestling. I don't didn't have any resources financially at that time, which may have limited him in his pursuit of it. But I think John probably would have found his way and ended up exactly where he is now, whether I or UPW had existed or not. But that said, UPW did exist. John came to me. We enrolled him as a student. I forgot what enrollment was in those days. I think it was $250 a month. I could be mistaken, but that sounds about right. Um, Ultimately, I chose to put guys on scholarship. And if we put somebody on a scholarship, I think you said we offered you a scholarship. We would still charge $50 a month. Like I told you before, my wife and I needed every penny to pay our bills, man, or else we weren't keeping the lights on for you or Paul Leonard or John Cena or anybody else to come train. So not long after John started, I remember he came into my office. We had two locations, one in LA at the Ross Center with Rico Chiapparelli and Dan Henderson and Randy Couture and all those guys. And then one at Huntington Beach Gold Gym, where my office was down underneath. We had the whole bottom floor as the UPW office. I remember John coming into my office, like seriously distraught and like on the verge of tears, if not at tears, saying, I can't afford it. I can't afford the tuition. And I think about it and I'm like, well, I can make the bills. This guy's going to make it. He's advantageous to have here for us, makes us look good, just like we're helping him. No problem, John. And let the tuition go. I can't remember if we kept charging the $50 maintenance fee or not, but put him on scholarship at that moment. Now, my first experience of John, or the John that I came to know, the human, not the hard working machine, because I way better at that than any of us knows. But my first like real human experience with him, there was a reality show casting before reality was a big thing called Manhunt. And if you look it up, you might find it. I think it ran for a couple episodes or one season. And if you're in the casting business, as we were, as I mentioned, with the big guy and big woman booking, you subscribe to a thing called breakdown services. And that's where all the casting agents send out the character descriptions of the type of person they're looking to cast in their new roles. And we used to subscribe to this. That probably cost me $500 a month. It's a industry heavy, very specific publication and not inexpensive. And we would read the breakdowns and look for parts to submit our clients to. So I see a breakdown for Manhunt and I read a part for one of the male leads. I'm like, that's John Cena. So we start the campaign, submit him. He goes and meets him. John's, I forgot how you described him before, but it was very accurate. Dude, he's good at meeting people and bringing people to his point of view. Look, is that it? Is that John right there, maybe, with the glasses?
I don't know if that is Joe. Maybe he has the binoculars in behind.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, maybe him. And Ray Hollett was on that show.
2001 it was out. So
there
that's
you go.
that
Zap from
matches
the
your
American.
timeline.
Yep. Zap from the American Gladiators. Ray Hollett. I put her on that show as well. She was one of the female leads. So anyway, John is good at bringing people to his point of view. He went in, they loved him because anyone that meets John Cena for the first time is going to love John Cena because John knows how to create that with somebody. I mean, he knows how to make an impression. I learn a lot of lessons still at this advanced age for how John does that. So the deal goes on and on and on. The producer, Julie, I remember her well. I liked her. She was great. Negotiations were prolonged. It was not an easy deal to get done. And I put a lot of time into it, a lot of energy into it. I was really excited for him. There he is. Look at that. John Cena in Manhunt. Oh my God. And he killed that role too, of course. He's good at that shit. Really good at it.
He's all natural there too, I bet.
I don't want to get into that.
Well.
Dude,
I'm just kidding. I just heard Ronnie Coleman recently say that that in his opinion John Cena was natural. I don't personally care, but I found that funny.
Yeah, it's a little funny. It's a little funny. John, his business is his business where it comes to that. I don't know. No comment. So anyway, this deal goes on and on and on. It's taken a lot of time, a lot of resources. But honest to God, and this is going to probably sound like me trying to sound like a good guy, but one of my very favorite things, Hannibal, I kid you not, was when I got a development deal in the mail and the talent didn't know it was coming, or I booked a movie or TV part and I got to deliver the good news to the talent. I love that because they loved it and it made a big difference in their life. It wasn't like, hey, I just made a $300 commission, even though I'm the short, Napoleonic, money grubbing Jewish promoter. That was not my first motivation. I was genuinely happy to be able to deliver good news. I loved it. Got John $40,000 for that role. I'll never forget that. And to close that deal, I was in my car at the Irvine Spectrum parking lot in Irvine, California. My wife and I were going to dinner. I'm like, hey, honey, I'm finishing the call. Do you mind? She's like, no, it's fine. She knew what it was all about. She goes in. Devin, I was on that call 2 hours later when my wife is still sitting in the restaurant. I think it was our anniversary. So maybe no small wonder why we're no longer married. A lot of those days and evenings. 2 hours in the car to close that deal. And we closed it, $40,000. That was a lot of money back then, especially for a guy who not long before that had come into my office distraught about not being able to pay his wrestling tuition. Closed a deal for 40 grand for Manhunt for John Cena, who recently we let go on his wrestling tuition because he couldn't afford it, which was fine because I knew he was going to be a star and it was good for everybody. That was fine. I called John, we closed the deal, $40,000. I'll never forget. This is when I hung up going, is this John? Is this who John is? So here's what he says to me, Hannibal. He's like, oh, then I'll never be able to approximate the tone of voice other than to say it was unkind and snide. He's like, don't spend your $4,000 all in one place, okay? And I'm like, wow. So that's probably a pretty good example. That's a long answer to a short question, the Paul London and John Cena examples. But you brought John up. That's
I'll
probably a
just
pretty
say
good.
one thing though quickly. All TV show agents and movie agents take a percentage, which I'm sure his agent today also takes a percentage.
No, for sure. I think he's with William Morris. I'm pretty sure. And whether he is or not, or ICM maybe. Yeah, of course. And it's accepted. And I don't think it was maybe so much the fact that he was, maybe he did begrudge giving me $4,000, but he didn't give me $4,000. I used, at that point, 15 years of experience knowing how to do these deals. The fact that I had a phone that I paid the bill on and a website that I created that I paid for and a place that I rented to train people, which all coalesces into this opportunity from which I could hear about Manhunt and, submit John Cena for this part and then use all my years of experience, just like Barry Bloom does now and has done forever, to get their clients these great deals. I mean, one other John example, and I don't want to stay on John all night. I know we have a lot to talk about. But as I mentioned earlier, back in the day, WWF would send me the development contracts to hand out to the people that they were signing. And again, it was so fun giving those things out. So I got contracts in the mail one day, and I knew they were coming. It was for Basil Bozinis, otherwise known as Bad Boy Bale, Bad Boy Basil. God rest his soul. Basil passed many years ago. The same day Basil's contract came for Aaron Aguilera, who went on to have a short run as Jesus in WWE. Actually headlined one pay-per-view against John when Jesus was Carlito's henchman. And then Justin McCulley, the UFC fighter, got a contract the same day. And John Cena, that was the fourth contract. Now, development deals at that point were pretty well standardized. We got a bigger deal for Sylvester Terkay because Sylvester he was an NCAA golden prospect. Jim Ross loved that stuff. They wanted him badly. WCW wanted Sylvester. ECW wanted Sylvester. So we did a deal that well exceeded the standard development fee at that time for Sylvester. I would get, when Sylvester moved to OVW and Jim Cornette started riding his ass, take that little fucker Bassman's hand out of your pocket. Sylvester would call me, he goes, yeah, you did so much for me. You got me way more than they offered. He goes, like the 10% is nothing. He goes, it's more than a wash. He goes, I wouldn't be making nearly this without you. I got a check in the mail every 2 weeks, like clockwork from Sylvester. Hannibal, one day a check shows up and it's $5 more. So it's always the same amount, $5 more than usual. And I call Sylvester. I'm like, hey, I'm just curious. Why do you put an extra $5 in the check this week? And he's like, oh, yeah, we did this indie show and they paid me $50. So he gave me a $5 commission on the indie show. And I'm like, dude, you gotta, I mean, I earned it, but you have to love that. That's a guy who not only gets it, but appreciates it. Now, with the contracts that came for Aaron and Basil and Justin and John, the deals were all the same back in those days. Ready for this? $300 a week was how much those guys made at the time, startup development deal. I remember calling Bruce and going, Bruce, you guys are hot on Cena, as you should be. I go, I've seen what this guy eats. I know what it's costing him. Got to new things were tight for him financially. I go, he's, again, doesn't take a genius to see this. He's going to be a big star for you guys. You got to pay him a little more. Can we get him $500 a week? And they said, yeah. So when the contract showed up, it was Basil, Aaron, and Justin at 300, John at 500. Now, I went and used all my influence with WWF and everything I have done over the years to know how to make that kind of ask, to get in a way where you have finesse and subtlety or not putting anybody off by asking for more, to get him $200 more than they initially offered him. My commission from John was $50 a week. Not my commission, mine and my wife's commission, mine and Ultimate University's, Ultimate Management's commission. So we could pay Todd and Melinda and Anthony and the insurance policy and the electric bill and all of that. Our commission was $50 a week, 10% of the $500 that he was making. Now, he would never have gotten that $300 contract without me. He may have found it somewhere else ultimately. Again, John was a hustler. He may have found it. He positively would not have gotten the 500 because I got him the extra 200. Let's do the math. Take the $50 commission out of it each week. It's $450. So it's $150 more than he would have been making had he taken the 300. So John very quickly after got shipped off to OVW, or Cornette, as he'd been riding Sylvester and Stefan Gemlin and Russ McCullough, who were all down there, started riding John. John was there for 1 week when I got a letter from him in the mail, and it was something like a one-line letter. I can kind of picture it now. I will no longer be needing your services as a manager. And that was it. Those kind of things like informed to me my version of John, unfortunately. Not the superstar wrestler or actor, because he's damn good at it, not the hard worker. No one works harder. But those are my experiences with John. And it's like, you hear the term adding insult to injury. It's like I felt like I fairly bent over backwards for him. That's okay. He deserved it. It's like one thing I do a lot of, and I'm going to say it here, and this is going to sound the opposite of self-deprecating, and it's probably going to sound very egotistical. Like we hear about John Cena. Back to John. Sorry, John, if you're listening, who's done 400 Make-A-Wish grants, which is amazing. Back in the day, guys would stay in their hotel room and play video games. John's out doing Make-A-Wish. So props to him for doing that. But you also hear like he never wants publicity for it, right? I mean, it's pretty well publicized, so I don't know how that makes sense, but it's fine. I think about that because I do a lot of hospital visits with my dogs, my pit bulls, the ones that are like really suited to go out in public. I do a lot of hospital visits for people that have cancer. And I know I've done more than 400 for sure. I can positively say, other than maybe talking about it on a show or two like this, I've never got any publicity. I want John's gig, man. I want the one where someone makes all the arrangements for you, because that's the hard part of it. And then flies you there first class and puts you up in a nice hotel. I'd like to have that gig. But again, John's doing the work, so that's really cool. I'm doing a lot of that in these times, even when I'm pretty well down. I physically have the moment. I'll go to a local hospital. And dude, that's what's keeping me going, because like is I hope John Cena and I do talk one day. I think one thing we would agree on is that when you do something for somebody else, you're also doing it for yourself. And there's nothing at all selfish in that. Nothing.